Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode. I'm Mike Monticello.
I'm Ryan Pizlakowski.
And I'm Jennifer Stockberger.
So today we're going to talk about the completely redesigned 2022 Infiniti QX60. These are going to be our first impressions on this luxury mid-sized three-row SUV from Infiniti, which over the years has had different names. Years ago, it was actually known as the JX. But the one thing that has stayed common and is still true now is that the QX shares its basic platform and underpinnings with the also recently redesigned Nissan Pathfinder. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We rented a QX60 from Infiniti, and that's what our first drive impressions are based on. But we also will be buying one as soon as they become available. But as anyone who is trying to buy a car right now knows, it's not easy getting a new car, either A, getting it, or B, getting it pretty close to MSRP. But let's talk a little bit about what the QX60 is. As I said, it shares this platform with the Nissan Pathfinder. This QX60 and the Nissan Pathfinder both had gotten a little bit long in the tooth, hadn't had a full redesign in a while. They've done that. Both vehicles on paper certainly look better. One of the big changes is they switched from the continuously variable transmission to a 9-speed automatic transmission, which usually helps the drivability. And as before, still front-wheel drive standard, all-wheel drive is optional. And the QX60, only one powertrain. It's a 295 horsepower, 3.5-liter V6. Base price ranges from $46,850 to $63,250. And standard active safety and driver assist features, you know, we're always harping on this. We love to see what Infiniti has put on this vehicle, which is standard forward collision warning, automatic emergency braking with pedestrian detection, blind spot warning, rear cross traffic warning, rear automatic braking, and lane departure warning, all standard on all trim levels. So we really like to see that. The vehicle we rented from Infiniti cost $63,945. That's including its $1,025 destination charge. Vehicle is on sale, should be on sale about the time you're watching this or listening to this podcast. So, Jen, I'm going to start with you. You know, I mentioned a little bit, the last QX60 was a little bit underwhelming, especially in terms of its drivability. Do you feel that they've made an improvement over the old one with this new model?
I do. So I really liked this car. Not only was it a super smooth, good power delivery, it felt upscale. It was quiet. Again, maybe I just like quiet. It doesn't. But I really liked this car, and I really liked how the power was delivered. It's funny. You go back 10, 15 years, and I remember saying, if you could take pieces of all different manufacturers and put them into one ideal car, kind of your ideal car, I remember saying the engine that I would put in was the Nissan 3.5 V6. And here is still a 3.5 liter Nissan V6 that's really, really good. I find it very interesting that they went from the CVT back to a 9-speed. I think it does super well, quick shifts, one of the best stop-start technologies. It was almost imperceptible. A lot of times on stop start, I'm tempted to shut them off because they shutter back to life. Really, really good. Again, quiet cabinet, not quite as sporty of a car as I might have expected. I tend to put Infiniti on the little bit sportier side of Nissan's Infiniti's lineup. Good visibility forward, but it just deteriorates, as do so many SUVs with that slopey shape. And in this one, if you have that third row up, you better put those rear head restraints down in that third row because you can't see a thing. And luckily, they flip forward and can ease that. But if you don't have anyone in that third row, put those babies down. Shifter. Just when you thought we couldn't reinvent it any other way, Infiniti has changed it again, and it's kind of a sliding monostable, what we say comes back to center. Again, the only benefit I can find to all of these shifter changes is real estate. That monostable just allows a much smaller space to operate it. But boy, again, I don't think there's another way, and there's always seems to be another way that doesn't always make sense.
I got to be honest, Jen, I got into it and I couldn't get it out of park at first. I don't know what I was going into, but I could not find reverse.
And why? I just don't
I
understand
think it's
why.
because, just the way you have to move it to do things is just, we sort of have gotten used to these electronic monostable gear selectors. And then, as you said, Jen, someone changes it a little bit and it's like, wait, that's not how the other ones all do it. Well, now they're doing it this way. So
it's got a big dash of capacitance type buttons, which mean they
I wanted
don't
to talk about that.
But then they clunk. That's the only word I could find. It gives you, which we like, some tactile feedback, but I'm not sure I like a clunk.
They went like completely overboard on this capacitive touch technology, which, folks, if you know what we're talking about, it gives you like haptic feedback, whatever the ergonomic description you want to use of the day is, but you press on it and some systems both either beep at you or some systems vibrate a little bit or some do both. This one, like Jen said, you're spot on. It's, when you're changing any of the seat heaters or any basically control on that big screen thing, it makes such a loud clunk with every time. So you're changing the fan speed, clunk. You're changing your seat heater down, clunk, clunk. What the heck? Yeah, who thought that was a good idea?
It doesn't give you that upscale feel because it feels clunky.
No.
And it's weird because, for those listening, and the capacitive touch that Mikey was just explaining to us, it's a smooth surface. It's a lot of times it's shiny, it's smooth. It doesn't even look like there's a button. It's the clunk you're hearing is the electronic feedback that's giving you behind the scenes. So they could have easily tuned that out.
Yes.
Or they could have changed that, right? I totally agree. I thought that was kind of odd. Yeah.
And then I only had one little headlight gripe, and this we've seen on a couple cars. You know how we've talked about low beam cutoff? So this is the transition between light and darkness at the top of the low beam. And it really, as I've said in the past, people describe it as somebody pulled a shade down over my headlights. So it's very, very dark above that low beam line. When you have the high beams on this QX60, it's still there. Normally you put the high beams on and that goes away. That cutoff line, still there. And we've seen it on a couple of vehicles.
So when we buy our QX60, this could be an interesting headlight test that you are going to perform on.
And again, quite frankly, we don't have a sharp cutoff deduction in the high beam because typically you don't see it. But I will certainly write about it if it's there.
Jen, I agree that it's, I do remember how much the continuously variable transmission CVT sapped the old car's driving dynamics, drivability, and I agree the 9-speed is way better. I thought it was a little abrupt off the line at times. Ryan, I'm curious if you noticed that, and also what you thought about the handling. Did you like the handling? Jen's thought it could be a little better. I personally thought it was not bad for a pretty good sized SUV. What are your feelings on those two things?
Yeah, so just back to the power delivery and the power. I mean, it's kind of wonderful to see a 3.5 liter V6 in an SUV of this size today. A lot of them are going to 4-cylinder turbos and whatnot. This has got some nice power. I did find it a little jumpy. I had to kind of learn the throttle just on taking off, and not a big gripe, but there was a little learning curve there. But what I didn't like, it has enough power where if you take off with a little bit of, you're on a merge or whatever, it has some torque steer. Torque steer comes from the front wheel drive car world, right? If you have a lot of decent amount of power going to just the front wheels, it actually can pull the steering wheel on you, depending on the camber of the road and all that, right? So this is an all-wheel drive vehicle, but this is just tells me that it's got a front wheel bias in the drivetrain, right? And that kind of drives me nuts. That's a little nuanced. Maybe some people might not even ever realize this or care.
Maybe you need to accelerate a little more gently.
Well,
I felt it too, Ryan, and I'm glad you brought it up because you gave a great description of what it is. And I think, as sort of, car driving guys or gals, it just tells you, oh, well, this is a front drive bias system. And for some reason that bothers you a little bit for some reason, because we like typically rear drive bias systems are, have better handling dynamics. But anyway, great for picking that up, Ryan, and mentioning it for sure.
Yeah. So I thought that was a little bit, it took away from it a little bit, but go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, I also found the steering a little light. I don't know if you guys did.
Yeah. So getting into the handling, I thought it's okay. I mean, it's totally capable. I think the person that buys that car would be very happy with it. But it turns in quick, but it doesn't have a lot of feedback, and the steering is a bit light.
Totally agree.
It handles well. I thought it was quite impressive, but I need a little more feedback. I like a little more feedback in the steering. But it almost I think it almost drives a little smaller than it is. It got pretty good, and that's usually a good thing. So I thought that was a good thing too. However, I think the ride matched it though. The ride had a firm, more of a taut feel to it, but it was almost brittle in some situations. And it's kind of a luxury feeling vehicle until you start hitting some of those bumps, and that's where I kind of was a little turned off, I guess. But
well, you know what's funny? You bring that up, Ryan. That's kind of what we talked about with the brand new Nissan Pathfinder as well. Is that when you are kind of driving it a little bit aggressively, it feels smaller. You're like, whoa, because it's a pretty good sized vehicle.
Yeah.
And this one has that same feel that when you do drive it like on a fun road and push it a little bit, you're like, oh, it actually kind of like comes into its own a little bit. But in regular driving, especially the QX model has this, kind of really big hood. So it feels like a big vehicle, but it's nice that it does kind of turn a little smaller because of the good handling dynamics. But I 100% agree with you on the ride. That's one of my only real letdowns with the vehicle, is that I think the ride, I think most roads, it's fine. It's fine on the highway.
Right. But
when you hit like deeper or harder edged potholes, and I really got to put the blame, Ryan, I know this is near and dear to your heart, tires. I think it's the 20-inch tires. I really do.
So
with those, makes it feel jittery, and those rough roads, you just get this jittery feeling, or brittle. I think brittle is what it really feels like.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. And over the years, driving different cars, I've driven cars with huge wheels, and they rode really well. It's all in the tuning of everything. But certain cars, the way they tune the suspension allows you to feel the wheel and tire package. And I don't know when we buy ours if it's going to be a 20-inch wheel or if it will have a little more rubber and maybe like an 18-inch wheel. I don't know. It doesn't help the ride here, I don't think. I do attribute it some of that to the wheel and tire package. It could also be the tires itself too. Who knows?
Right. I have a specific. Go ahead,
I was just going to say too. Many of us are in it by ourselves. Keep in mind, this is a 3-row SUV. When you had 6 more passengers, would some of that settle in a little bit, some of the shuddering? But don't know. Again.
All right, you ready for a Jen-specific question? Ryan, you can just go take a break because this is related to people that are a little shorter, not you giants. This is for me and Jen only. So you stay out of this conversation, which is Jen. Did you find what I did, which is that, so I have a pretty long torso. And so in most vehicles, actually, I have the seat all the way down to its lowest. In this one, again, because of that kind of big hood and everything, I really felt the need to keep raising the seat up to feel like I had a better view. Did you find you had to do the same thing?
So I'm just the opposite of you. I also have a long torso, but I do think I crank as much seat height as I can get usually, and I want to be right up there. So I did not. I felt it was okay. So maybe we just sit very differently. I have short legs, so I have to come up, and I like to go up.
She might be closer,
Yeah, I think you do sit closer. So what I noticed was because I just felt this need to get a better view, I had to raise the seat up. Now, the armrests, both the door and the center one, now were too low for me to really use, especially on the highway when I like to kind of be going down the highway with still both hands on the wheel. I really can't reach the armrest. So that was a little issue with me. But it's still plenty of headroom. I think even Ryan, and we'll bring you back into the conversation. I assume even for you, plenty of headroom. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. So nice. It's roomy. Plenty of room. I'm 6'2", and I fit in there without an issue. I think people of all heights would be okay. Yeah.
So now, coming around to your question, definitely a better car than it was.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, So we answered that. We got to talk about the second and third rows just because it is a 3-row SUV. I thought, okay, I'll talk about the second row, then one of you guys can talk about the third row if you want. Ryan, I don't even know if you got back in there. But, so I thought it was interesting. So this had second row captain's chairs. I liked the fact that it's kind of a stadium seat. I actually always like that feel when I get into a vehicle, but I had like maybe 1.5 inches of headroom left over. And as we just talked about, I'm not big of a guy. And the other thing I thought was interesting is that the seat is really flat. And I thought that is a really weird thing for a captain's chair when you don't have to worry, Jen, you know about car seats. You don't have to worry about contouring, upsetting the middle seat or anything. And I thought it was interesting that they didn't give the seats more contouring. Did you guys notice that? And follow-up question, what was your opinion of the third row?
So I will just talk about the child seat thing. Typically, and again, we're talking bench seats in most cases, but typically a flatter seat is actually better for child seats. So maybe they're thinking child safety, because when you start to get to boosters or a lot of wider, there's seats now that go from birth to booster age. Some of them are pretty wide. Those cushion bolsters actually interfere. Flatter is actually better in terms of child seats. And again, to your point about the headroom, it depends on how big your passengers are. For me, I went from a 4'11", 12-year-old to a 6 foot tall 15-year-old in a blink, so be thinking about that. And again, we always say, bring all your passengers to the lot when they're trying out these cars. But Brian, you do third row. You do that evaluation.
Yeah. Have the big guy do the third row.
But he does it.
Real funny, guys. The second row, I agree. I thought the seat was flat, and there isn't a lot of headroom, which kind of took me by surprise. But I did think the seat was up a little bit, which helps your posture with your knees. If the seat's down low and gives you headroom, then your knees are bent and they're up in the air, if you will, and that sometimes isn't a good thing either. So I thought that they could have done a little better job in the second row. The third row is another third row SUV that probably shouldn't be a third row SUV, right? I mean, it's not that big of a car. It's a pinch. I call it a pinch seat for kids. If if you really have to stick an adult back there, you got to do some real contorting. But there's almost no leg room. The seat's real low, and there's okay headroom depending on how you kind of contort yourself in there. It's tight.
Yeah, and when we talk about third rows that are fairly useless for adults, one of the things Ryan just mentioned there is the low seat. What happens when you have a low seat, if you haven't sat in a third row, now you have this, especially for adults, you have this really big knee bend, right? Your knees are way up in the air. So it's uncomfortable to have that knee bend. And now because your knees are up in the air, well, guess what? Your legs, the underneath part of your legs, your thighs are not touching the seat at all. Now you have no leg support whatsoever. So it's something where, like you said, Ryan, in a pinch, say you have some friends over or you pick some folks up to go to dinner or something and it's not that far away. But for a trip, an adult is not going to want to sit back there. No. Before we move on, I just want to mention one other thing. The interior is pretty gorgeous.
Yes.
I mean, it has this lots of soft touch materials, lots of pads. The quilting, yes. I love the quilting on the dash and the seats. I thought looked fantastic. I hope the one we buy will have that. I don't know. We'll see what we end up with. But anyway, overall, like you said, Jen, an improvement. It appears. These are our first impressions. We will be buying one as soon as we can. And put it through our test program. Check out more information on the QX60 on consumerreports.org. And once we get the vehicle through our test program, look for full road test results there. Let's move on to an audience question. And don't forget to send those questions, comments, 30-second video clips to talkingcars@icloud.com. That's the best way to reach us. So we're going to see what Abby from Canada has to say. And Abby says, I currently drive a 2007 Chevy Malibu, and I'm looking for something smaller and fun I can show off to my friends. I love the idea of having a convertible, specifically the BMW Z4 in the summer. Can you explain how that might work in the winter where we get a lot of snow? Jen, can you give Abby some tips here on convertibles in the snow?
Right. So not convertibles in the snow, but rear-wheel drive Z4 in the snow, maybe. So first of all, Abby's from Canada. So winter tires, if you're driving that Z4, are already a must. So, and certainly even if it weren't mandated by law, they would be a must for a rear-wheel drive Z4 in the winter, because that rear-wheel drive configuration is just not going to be able to move, particularly if it has any level of performance tire on it. So if you do that, you're going to be able to get around, Abby, in the Z4, but you don't have much clearance in terms of accumulating snow. And that rear-wheel drive, again, is still not going to help. Two ideas, maybe, Abby. One, how about an Audi TT? Quattro all-wheel drive. Put the winter tires on that Still doesn't solve the clearance problem. Again, convertible, but you might be a little better off in getting around in the winter. The other idea I had was, why don't you hang on to the Malibu? Again, I don't know your garage space or your pocketbook space, but keep the Malibu as your winter car and just keep a really nicely tuned Z4, TT, whatever it is you choose, as your 3-season car. So that was my other thoughts. I don't know if you guys had any other ideas that might work.
Yeah. So Jen, I mean, I wrote down in my notes the exact same things that you just mentioned, which is, okay, Z4 is rear drive only. Obviously, winter snow tires are a necessity. And then the whole clearance issue that would be likely a little better with your Malibu, and for sure even better with, a taller SUV. So
that doesn't get a fun factor in there.
Yeah, she could, if she is hung up on a BMW, though, she could even do a 3 Series convertible with all-wheel drive.
Yeah,
so
with an XI.
And then you have a little bit of a backseat, you have a little more practicality, and still fun to drive.
Yeah, and a little more clearance probably over the.
Yeah, but I think winter tires for any of these cars where she lives is a must.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to learn more about the topics and the cars we talked about, you can click on the links in the show notes. Don't forget to send those questions, comments, 30-second video clips to talkingcars@icloud.com. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you all next week.